this computer. Okay. This is a shir on Likutei Sichos Chelek Chaf Aleph, the 21st book of Likutei Sichos, the portion of Yisro, the third Sicha in the portion. This is going to be a shir about a very, very fundamental teaching, which is to treat other people nicely, not to embarrass somebody else. We can't imagine something more basic, a positive character trait than treating people with respect. But we're going to see that it's learned from here, from a pasuk, it's learned from a verse, and we're going to get a little bit technical about the details of how it's learned. So the first paragraph here, Aleph, in the end of the parsha of Yisro, on the pasuk it says, "V'lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbechi." It speaks about building an altar for Hashem in the subsequent Mishkan, in the temple that's going to be. But the detail that's taught in the end of this week's parsha is when you do build an altar, v'lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbechi, don't go up on steps to ascend to the Mizbeach, which is several feet high. Asher lo tigaler vatchalav, so that your nakedness should not be exposed on it. The thinking here is that when one walks, when one climbs steps, one has to split their legs. And technically, if one wasn't wearing pants, you are wearing a robe, you split your legs, then you're exposing your erva, your exposed places. They had pants in the Mishkan, but it would be an exposure on top of the steps. So even though, as we're going to see, even though they were wearing pants, but still in all, because this could be, in other words, the movement of taking a big step or climbing a step could, in certain instances, be exposing one's nakedness on top of the ground upon which one is walking. Therefore, one shouldn't go up with steps, shouldn't climb steps to go to the Mizbeach, to go to the altar. Rather, it was going to be a ramp. So the Mechilta says, now just think about this. It's a kal v'chomer. If the stones that don't have any knowledge, don't have any perception, not for good enough for bad, stones are inanimate objects. Nonetheless, Hashem said you shouldn't treat them with a denigrating form of treatment. You shouldn't, in other words, be disrespectful to the stones of the altar. Chavercha, your friend, shubidmuto shel misha amar vaya olam, your friend who's in the form, fashioned in the form of the one who said and the world was. In other words, fashioned in who's the one who said and the world became? Hashem. So your friend who's fashioned in the same form of Hashem, so to speak, isn't it a din? Wouldn't it be how much more so that you shouldn't treat him in a disrespectful way? It's a simple logic. If even a stone which doesn't have any perception, any understanding of respect or disrespect, we're told not to walk in a way that could be deemed disrespectful, how much more so your friend who is formed in who has the form of the creator, form of the one who created the world, how much more so you have to make sure not to be disrespectful to him. Rashi also brings this kal v'chomer, but Rashi gives a little bit of a difference to it. Now, again, Rashi is quoting predecessors. Ostensibly, you would assume he's quoting the Mechilta, but yet he changes certain nuances. What are the changes? Rashi says, these stones that don't have any perception to be able to be particular about their embarrassment or about their being denigrated, nonetheless, the Torah said, Ho'il v'yesh behem tzorech, because there's a need in these stones, you should not treat them disrespectfully. So your friend, who is created in the image of your creator, and he does pay attention and does get irritated when he's disrespected, how much more so you need to respect him? You would say it's the same teaching. It is the same teaching. You would say it's the same teaching. It is, but it's just a little bit of a change. Did you notice some of the changes? The Mechilta says that the stones that don't have any perception for good or for bad, Hashem said don't disrespect them. Rashi says the stones that don't have perception to be able to be irritated by the disrespect given them. So there's a change there. So we understand that the fact that Rashi emphasizes how the stones really have no concept of being disrespected makes the whole logic much stronger. In other words, by highlighting how little the stones are affected by disrespect, it makes the point of respecting a friend much more powerful. If even a stone that has zero perception of disrespect, we have to respect because it's in the Mizbeach. Your friend who has 100% perception of when he's being disrespected, how much more so you need to respect him? Also, Rashi changes something else. The Mechilta said, your friend who is in the form of the one who Hashem said in the world was created. Rashi says, your friend who is like in the form of your fashioned like your creator. By saying your creator, he's highlighting how special a person is. He's like your creator, like the one who's if even when you walk on the Mizbeach, you have to be careful, right? Even though the stone doesn't care about its being disrespected. So when you're talking about your friend who's in the image of your creator, how much more so you have to be, and he does care about his respect, how much more so you have to pay attention. But so we understand why Rashi adds those nuances. It makes the argument stronger. What we don't understand is Rashi inserts something else and says the stones. Why does the Torah says? Rashi says, Amrat Torah. The Torah said, "Hoil v'yesh behem tzorach." These stones, since there is a need for them, we have to respect them. What does it mean? Since there is a need for them. So we're going to analyze this whole concept a little bit more, and then we'll understand what that addition is. Since there is a need for them. Paragraph 2. We'll understand first by understanding there's a difference in the understanding of learning the pasuk, the way the Mechilta teaches it and the way Rashi teaches it. In the Mechilta it says, "Asher lo tigaler vatchalam." The Torah says you should not reveal your. How does he translate there? Asher lo tigaler vatchalam. 1 second. I just want to see how the translation is. Yeah, so that your nakedness will not be uncovered on it. So the Mechilta says you can't. Allah is on what? Is on the Mizbeach. It's on the Mizbeach that you're not allowed to take a very big step. Remember, when you take a big step, you're technically exposing your nakedness on it. Again, they were wearing pants, so there wasn't practically there was nothing exposed. But that action of taking a big step could be a disrespectful action. That's why, by the way, even today, it's considered very dainty, ladylike, only takes small steps. There's something about taking a big step that's considered to be uncouth or, in a sense, revealing or yeah.
It's not about the point of view that it looks at. But
No.
No,
the stone would see it.
Yeah, we look forward people, no? Not from up and down.
The stone would see it from down.
Like of all directions, look at the person that's walking.
No, because you're walking on the stones. You're walking on the stones. The stones would be facing upwards to where the person is walking. If the person takes a big step, the action is an action of revealing. At least the action looks like it's an action that would reveal to the stones a nakedness. But it says only on the Mizbeach, one might think you're not allowed to take a big step in the rest of the Heichal, the sanctuary, and the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. And you would think if even on the Mizbeach, that's not the holiest thing in the Beit HaMikdash, you're not allowed to take a big step. Taking a big step and going up on a step is pretty much the same thing. When you have to go up a step, it's like taking a big step. The equivalent, I mean, if you do exercise, if you make a gradient, it makes you work harder. If you take big steps, you have to work harder. But the same concept here, they're interchangeable. The commentaries speak about whether or not it's always interchangeable, but for our purpose, right now he's saying, so you can't take a big step or you can't climb a step. You would think that only if it even applies on the Mizbeach, which is Kal, which is not the most holy thing in the Beis HaMikdash, How much more so you shouldn't be able to take a big step in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash? No, it's not the case. Talmud Lamad, the Torah says, Asher lo tigaler vatcha alav, that this prohibition not to take a big step or not to climb up on a step to get to it is only about alav, the Mizbeach. Bo iyata posea p'tzia yitra, you're not allowed to take a big step on the Mizbeach, but you're allowed to take a big step in the Heichal, in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash. Rashi doesn't bring that lesson. That's only the Mechilta brings it. Rashi, and he comments on the Torah, he does not bring that interpretation. He just says that if there's steps, why can't you take steps on the Mizbeach? Because alidei ma'alot, if you would take steps, you would have to take big steps, because climbing up steps means you need to take bigger steps than usual. A usual step is your heel lines up, the beginning of your foot lines up with your heel, then you put your foot forward and lines up with your heel. Small steps. When you have to take a step, you're by definition taking a bigger step. So Rashi says you can't take a big step on the Mizbeach, because through that by climbing up steps, you're taking big steps. Even though it's not literally, says Rashi, it's not literally revealing nakedness. Because it says about the Kohanim, they had to wear pants that they were wearing. So there's actually no revealing of nakedness. Rashi addresses this. He says, nonetheless, taking big steps is close to revealing nakedness. In other words, there's only one thing stopping it from not being revealing nakedness, and that is that there's a piece of cloth that the person is wearing. But by its act, it is an act that if not for that cloth he's wearing, it would reveal nakedness. Therefore, you're not allowed to do it. Therefore, it's denigrating to the stones to be taking such a step on those stones in a way that could be considered like revealing nakedness. Now, the interesting that when we had this Kal Vachomer, when we said if even the stones and how much more so the people, in the Mechilta, this teaching comes immediately only after we first say that in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash, one could take big steps. Why is that? Why only once we've taught that this is only a law for the Mizbeach, not for the rest of the Beis Hamikdash? Why only then do we say, now let's analyze and see if this is the law for stones, how much more so for a person? The reason one follows the other is because the prohibition of loti galer vatchalav, don't reveal your nakedness on the Mizbeach. In other words, don't treat it denigratingly. One would think it has nothing to do with the Mizbeach, with the stones of the altar, with the souls of the altar in and of themselves. One would think it has to do because the altar is a part of the temple. And it's got to do with the holiness of the temple. You have to have awe and fear and respect for Hashem, who is the one who resides in the Mizbeach, in the altar, and in the temple. Right? Just like when we say you have to have fear and awe from the temple, we say not from the actual temple, but you have to have fear from the one who dwells in the temple, from Hashem. As the Chinuch says, the reason we have a mitzvah to have awe, to treat the Mishkan itself with deference, with veneration, in other words, with reverence, is because we have to remind ourselves to fear Hashem. If we're going to fear Hashem's house, that means we're fearing Hashem. So if it would be that the stones, because they're part of the Beis Hamikdash, that's why we have to treat them with respect. So how could we learn that this would apply even more with our fellow? Our fellow is not part of if the reason is because the stones are part of Hashem's sanctuary, so I can't learn to apply that to fellow people. They're not part of the sanctuary. The stones, yes, the mikdash, the stones, because it's part of the sanctuary. But how can I now draw a Kal Vachomer and make a teaching and say, if even the stones of the sanctuary, how much more so your friend? No, your friend's not a sanctuary. Your friend's not a mikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem's presence is there. You have to treat the stones respectfully because they're like all the rest of the temple. It's Hashem's presence shining through the stones. Your friend, maybe not. It's the person. So because, however, that's why the Mechilta first says, no, this is not a law that has to do with this, with the Beis Hamikdash per se. Because first, the Mechilta says this verse is talking particularly about the altar, about the Mizbeach. The rest of the Beis Hamikdash, you can take big steps. You can go skipping through the rest of the Beis Hamikdash if you want. Even though you're taking a big step, you can build steps and go up. No issue. It's only the Mizbeach. It's only the Mizbeach. Again, if it was...
It's where they put the animal in jail also? When the priests come up, they deal with the animal or they will slaughter before?
When they come up to the Mizbeach, the animal was already slaughtered before. They only pulled up the things. So what we understand from that is that the prohibition, the Mechilta first said the prohibition is only it's not because the stones, or not just because the stones are part of the Beis Hamikdash. It's a special teaching about the stones of the Mizbeach. Somehow there's an instruction, the stones of the Mizbeach, we have to treat them with kavod. And therefore we can say if even stones, which don't have any perception of good and bad, and nonetheless, you have to treat them with respect, how much more so your friend who does know the difference between whether you respect him or not, how much more so you have to treat him, not denigrate him, treat him with respect. Now we'll understand also why Rashi says, remember the thing that's bothering us is Rashi adds the stones of the Mizbeach, we have to respect them because there is a need for them. What is that? What's that got to do with it? What does it mean there's a need? Paragraph 3. This will explain what Rashi adds by saying the words Amrat Torah hoil v'yesh b'hem tzorech. The Torah said, since there's a need for them, lo tinhag b'hem minhag b'zayon, you should not treat them in a denigrating way. You shouldn't disparage them. What does Rashi say? Since Rashi understands, Rashi did not tell us, like the Mechilta did, that the prohibition of climbing up steps is only on the altar. But in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash, you would be able to climb up steps. Which again, by the fact that the Mechilta did tell us that, it told us that it's not the reason for respecting the bricks of the Mizbeach, the stones of the Mizbeach, is not just because they're part of the Beis Hamikdash, but there's something special about the stones of the Mizbeach themselves. So now Rashi wants to explain what is special about the stones of the Mizbeach. Rashi says what's special about the stones of the Mizbeach that Hashem says you have to treat them with respect, because hoil v'yesh b'hem tzorech, these stones are required. And because these stones are required, that's why Hashem said don't treat them with disrespect, don't go on a big step, don't climb steps on them. Not because they're part of the Mizbeach, not just because they're part of the Beis Hamikdash, but because there's something special about the steps of the Mizbeach. What's about the stones of the Mizbeach? What's special about the stones of the Mizbeach? There's a need to them. What is the need? So we're about to explain what that is. But according to this, we'll understand simply why. One second, why is it? We know that there's no prohibition to make steps elsewhere in the Mikdash. Why not? Shouldn't we have respect to all parts of the Beis Hamikdash? If it's disrespectful to climb up steps because of the splitting of the legs, so it should be in all the Beis Hamikdash. Why is the prohibition only about the Mizbeach? So the answer is because obviously, and on the contrary, there were steps in the rest of the just hang on one second. There were steps in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash. When you climbed up from one part of the Beis Hamikdash to the other, there were steps. But if it's disrespectful to have steps, why were there steps? So it must be that the Mizbeach had something unique, and that's being identified by the words Rashi says, there's some kind of need that these stones present and have in the function of the Beis Hamikdash, that because of that, we treat them with extra respect. And in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash, that doesn't exist. And we'll soon say what that is. Yeah.
But there's another commandment about stones in the Beis Hamikdash, is that you're not supposed to cut them with the sword.
That's something else. You're not allowed to cut them.
Them respect, but those are also stones in the other, right? Those are not only on the Mizbeach, those are on any
No,
part of the temple, right?
there's various levels of, yeah, you shouldn't cut. That's a different discussion. There's various levels of the Mizbeach for sure. No metal could have touched the stones on the Mizbeach because the Mizbeach is made to prolong life. Metal, its primary use is for war is to shorten life. So you can't have something that shortens life be involved with something that's preserving life. But that's a different.
But it's related in the idea of showing the stones.
It's not for showing the stuff. Yeah, it's similar in as much as there's symbolism that we learn, even though we're talking about an inanimate object. Yeah. So now let's see, what does it mean that, again, we've talked around and around, but we haven't said, what does it mean that these stones are important? Because there is a need. What does that mean? Paragraph 4. So the explanation is like this. The fact that we learn from the stones of the Mizbeach that you're not allowed to denigrate a fellow Jew, I mean, it's a wondrous thing. The question could be asked, you need to learn from the stones of the Mizbeach not to embarrass somebody else? You don't know that already? What's so special about learning it from the same way you're not allowed to denigrate the stones of the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to denigrate a fellow? It's a pretty obvious thing. You shouldn't embarrass somebody else. But here, what's it telling us? By the stones of the Mizbeach, we're not talking about literally bizayon. We're not talking about doing something shameful to the stones, but just minhag bizayon, doing something that could be interpreted, or it's an act. Again, we said that they're wearing pants, so there's no disrespect. There's minhag bizayon, mean it's done in a way, in a fashion of disrespect. If there wasn't pants and you were taking a big step, it would be disrespectful to the stone because it would have an exposure of the person's nakedness. That didn't happen, but still, there's an act of minhag bizayon. There's some act that's in the fashion, in the style of shamefulness, which is by the stones. Don't forget, the stones don't even have any feeling of bashfulness, of shamefulness. And when we talk about the problem of shaming somebody else, it's all about their feeling. To the point that there's an opinion in the Gemara that says that if somebody was embarrassed and shamed while he was asleep or dead, where the person who was being shamed never even knew about it or felt it, then the person who did the shaming is not really liable, because shaming is all about the perception of the one who was shamed. If the person was asleep and doesn't know that somebody made fun of him and never finds out, then did the one who shamed him really do any damage to the one who was shamed? Not really. Here you're talking about stones. So from the stone's perspective, it's not really shameful. It's just an act that can be construed as shame. The act of shame, the Ma'aseh Bizayon also, we're talking here not about acting in a shameful way. It's not like the guy went on the stones of his back and pulled down his pants and did something disrespectful. He took a step. In other words, to be disrespectful and act callously, that you can't do in any part of the Beis Hamikdash. You have to treat the Beis Hamikdash with respect. Here we're talking about going even extra and not even doing minhag bizayon, not even doing something that could be viewed as being in a fashion that's not respectful. It's not that it's not respectful. It could be thought, maybe somebody would think that, well, the guy's taking big steps, not wearing pants, it's disrespectful. He is wearing pants. It's just the whole thing is just a far stretch. And as Rashi says, as Rashi explained to us, there is no exposure here of nakedness because they're wearing pants. It's close to an act that could be viewed as being shameful. And that's why what we're learning here is not just you can't shame somebody else. We're learning just like the stone, where it's not really shame. It's just something that has a tinge of being behavior that could be viewed as shameful to the stone that doesn't even care anyway. How much more so when you do something? We're saying that when we want to apply this, how we should treat somebody else, that's the kind of level we should be careful and distant and protect ourselves from not shaming somebody else to that kind of extreme, not just not shaming him, but not even doing something that could be misconstrued or thought or perceived perhaps as being something that's shameful to him. Understand? We've now made it so much more, made it so much more subtle. You have to become so much more idle. We're teaching ourselves a lesson, Rashi's teaching us a lesson to be so much more sensitive to others, not even to do something that could be misconstrued by somebody who's insensitive that something shameful was done. Even stay away from any nuance of shaming somebody else. Hey, so this is also the difference between the Mechilta and Rashi about what is the actual prohibition. The Mechilta said you're not allowed to walk, you're allowed to walk big steps in the rest of the Beis Hamikdash. He says you're not allowed to do an action. You're not allowed to do an action in the Beis Hamikdash, even if it's just similar to an act of shame. Rashi says, no, that can't be it can't be that this is a prohibition to do an action that looks shameful, because otherwise, if that's the case, why is there a difference between the Mizbeach and the rest of the Beis Hamikdash? It must be that the reality is the action that's being done here would not be prohibited usually in the Beis Hamikdash because there's no bizayon. There really is no denigration here. So why by the Mizbeach are we saying don't go with steps, even though the guy's wearing pants and there's no bizayon? It's something special about the Mizbeach. There's some need here in those steps, in those stones. The stones have a need. And that's why the stones of the Mizbeach, since they're special and they're needed in some way, when you do something that can even be misconstrued as being in a fashion of shamefulness, even though it's not shamefulness, when it comes to the stones of the Mizbeach, you have to be extra careful. Why? So now finally we're going to explain what is this enigmatic the stones of the Mizbeach, since there is a need to them. What does Rashi mean? Paragraph 6. The explanation is like this. When Rashi says, since there is a need, Rashi means to say that the Kohanim cannot do the service on the Mizbeach unless they go on the stones. In other words, how are they going to get up the Mizbeach unless they climb on the stones? And that's why you can't treat the stones denigratingly. You know why? Because if you treat the stones without the proper respect, so what you're mistreating also, you're also being denigrating to the Kohanim who need the stones, or the Jewish people that need the Mizbeach for their atonement. Since these stones are needed, because these stones are needed by the Kohanim or by the people of Israel to be the Mizbeach, to give them atonement, you have to treat those stones with respect. Similar, like it says, that if somebody, usually there's halach, if somebody spit on a garment, patur, is not liable. Usually spitting is considered busha. To spit at somebody, you would be liable to pay damages for shame. Somebody in the street and spits at him, he has to pay a penalty for shaming them. What happens if you spit on somebody's clothes? Well, if you spit on my jacket, if my jacket's hanging on the hook, you didn't do anything. You can't shame my jacket. But if I'm wearing my jacket and you spit on it, now you're liable. Because spitting on the jacket means you're spitting on the person who's wearing the jacket. Similarly, when we talk here about the stones, these stones are not just stones. These stones are the stones of the Mizbeach. And the Kohanim need those stones to climb up to the Mizbeach. The Bnei Yisrael need those stones to make up the Mizbeach, which gives them atonement. Those stones, therefore, because they service us, they're important stones. I can't treat them with minhag bizayon. I can't treat them in a denigrating way. Because they're an integral part of the Mizbeach. But what about One second. What about all the rest of the steps in the Beis Hamikdash? Weren't they also necessary? No, not necessarily. Number one, the steps that led up, and you went up the different areas of the Beis Hamikdash, the steps that led up, technically, you could get in the other way. You don't have to go up the steps. Also, the steps were not literally in a place where you did the avodah. It's not the place where you actually did the service. You're talking about where did you actually, on the Mizbeach, they actually carried up, that's where they shechted the animal and they carried up the pieces of meat to put them on Mizbeach. The stones were being used for the actual service. The Kohanim were actually treading with the items that they were doing the avodah, with the items that they were doing their service, going up on the stones. So those stones are really needed, so you can't treat them in a way of minhag bizayon, in a way that they're being denigrated.
Don't you have steps at the menorah?
Thank you for asking that. I looked around to see if that question, I've always had that question. Maybe we've had it together in the past. And I think the answer is in the Mizbeach, the kevish, the ramp was part of the actual Mizbeach. To the point that it says, don't climb up on steps on my Mizbeach. If you climb up with steps to my Mizbeach, part of my Mizbeach is going to be the steps that lead up to it. With the menorah, that's not the case. The menorah would just be a footstool. It would just be a way to climb up to the menorah. But interesting that it's not mentioned here openly. But that would seem to be the simple answer. And therefore, when you walk up the steps of the Mizbeach, it's like you're on the Mizbeach. Like you're on the Mizbeach, those steps are critical for what is needed. Yesh b'Mizbeach, they are needed to be part of the service that's being done on the Mizbeach. And that's why, what are we learning from that? If you can't go on the stones, because they're needed to be part of the service on the Mizbeach, and therefore you have to treat them respectfully. So when you talk about a friend, even if it's only minhag bizayon, even if it's only something that looks like it's denigrating, but it's not really denigrating, which didn't actually cause your friend any feeling of busha, any feeling of shaming. Nonetheless, because he is in the form of your creator, so what you're doing is, if you're denigrating him, you're denigrating your creator. In other words, just like we said, that denigrating the stones of the Mizbeach, even they don't feel, but still because we have a need for them, they are important to the Kohanim, they are important to the children of Israel, therefore they get kind of a vicarious importance because they're needed by the people that need it, by the people that are offering up the carbon. If that is the case, how much more so when we're talking about somebody else who's bidmut yotzercha, he's in the form of your creator. In other words, Hashem needs this person. Hashem has fashioned this person like him. So when you're going to be denigrating to the person, Hashem made him look like him. You're denigrating to the one, not made him look like, that's not the point. You're being denigrating to the one who created this person. Why did he create the person? The moment he created the person means that the person is important to him. So if you're being disrespectful to the person, you're being disrespectful to the one who created the person and said, this person is important to me. Even if the person himself doesn't feel that he's being shamed, but just by giving off some kind of an impression of shaming to the person, even if he's not feeling it, you're shaming the one who created him. Just like with the stones of the Mizbeach. According to this, paragraph 7, according to this, we'll also understand the expression of Rashi when he says this kal v'chomer, when he says this teaching, he says, and if these stones that don't have any perception to be irritated or to care about their shame, nonetheless, the Torah says, since there's a need for them, you shouldn't treat them with any treatment of denigration. Your friend that is in the form that is in the same form of the one who fashioned, the one who created him, and he does care about his shame. How much more so you shouldn't shame him? Changing the language of the teaching from the Mechilta, which the Mechilta says, it doesn't say that the stones are not able to be annoyed or irritated by their being denigrated. Why did he change the language and speak about the stones not being able to care? Because what Rashi is saying is that even if those stones that cannot care about being embarrassed or not, and therefore the truth be told, there really is no concept of shame with stones. Remember, if a person doesn't even know he's been shamed, the whole prohibition of shaming him is not there. The whole penalty of shaming him is not there. So stones are not even in the realm of shame or not shame. They don't know anything. Nonetheless, because they are important, yesh be'em tzorech, they are needed for the kohanim. We say shaming them because the kohanim do understand what shame is, and they are needed by the kohanim in a vicarious way. Somehow we're projecting onto the stones that if you embarrass the stones, you're embarrassing the ones that need them. So how much more so when it's your friend who does understand, first of all, he's in the form of your creator. You see, it's not like the stones and the kohanim where you have to have a conceptual understanding that the stones form the mizbeach, and that's the way that the kohanim climb up to reach the mizbeach to be able to do the offering. There's a whole thought process when you connect stones to kohanim. When you connect your friend to Hashem, there's no thought process. Hashem created man in the image of God. So there's a much clearer connection between man and God that makes the teaching a kal v'chomer. How much more so? Also, when we talk about the concept of shame, the stones don't know about shame. The person does know about shame. So even if you didn't do something that's shaming to him, but there is a concept of shame that applies to him, which in the stones of the Mizbeach doesn't apply. So it's a very, very strong teaching. In other words, it now becomes a super strong teaching. Even the stones, the way Rashi learns it, it becomes incredibly tight, like an extreme. If even the stones that are not in the realm of being shamed, and yet because there is a need that the Kohanim and the Jewish people have for those stones, we have to treat them respectfully. Again, that need is a stretch. So how much more so when we're talking about a person who's in the form of his creator, the connection between him and the creator is so clear, and they do understand what shame is or isn't. They're in the realm of shame. How much more so we have to stay away from anything that can even be construed or seen as or interpreted as shame. So it tells us how far away we have to stay from doing something of bizayon, from doing something shameful to somebody else, like to an extreme. You wouldn't see that if you learned the Rashi without analyzing it, pulling it apart, dissecting it the way that Rebbe does, and finding the nuance in the way Rashi reworded it from the Mechilta to make this such a strong, compelling argument about how far you have to stay away from being shameful to somebody else. Now, here's the beauty. This parsha is a parsha that speaks about the greatest moments of history. Parsha of Yisro is about the Ten Commandments. So paragraph 8 says that the teaching of Rashi on Torah is always, what it also is the simple, and it's also the wine of Torah, Yeina shel Torah. So we can say that Rashi is giving us something beautifully deep like wine and sweet. As he says, that really, this is the last parsha. This is Rashi at the end of the Seder. We know that everything follows the end. So, because it's the end of the Seder of the Aseres Adibus of the Ten Commandments, this really sums up the theme and the intention of the Ten Commandments. The same way when we look at the actual Ten Commandments, we have Anochi Hashem, it starts with I am Hashem, you should not have any other idols, which are the most subtle and highest concept of Achdut Hashem, of the oneness of Hashem. But yet it goes right into the last 5, which are very simple things. It's things like don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't desire things that your friend has. So it starts from the highest forms of philosophy of meditating in the oneness of Hashem. And the end of the Ten Commandments gets into really base things, not to murder and so on. Similarly, Rashi is telling us here that in the end of the portion of Yisro, at the end of the day, when we finish talking about all the grandiose things of the Ten Commandments, the highlight at the end is you have to be so careful, even from simple interaction between you and your friend. Make sure don't to do anything even that has a minhag bizayon, even that can be misconstrued or that can be seen as being in a fashion of denigrating them, even if it's not something that denigrates them. But even in going along that path, one has to be careful of. In the same way, we know that the simple parts of the Ten Commandments are not a separate component. Like there's the holy parts, believe in God, don't have idols, and there's the the simple, common folk parts. No. We understand that the reason they're there together in the same 10 commandments is to teach us that really, if you want to be one with Hashem, if you want to talk about Hashem, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the only way you can really have proper belief in Hashem, be one with Hashem, is if you treat other people in a way where you don't violate Lo Tirtzach, or when you don't violate the other prohibitions, Bein Adam Lechavero. Bein Adam Lamakom, between you and Hashem, and Bein Adam Lechavero, is required in order, between you and your fellow, is required in order to have a proper, between you and Hashem. You can't have a proper relation with Hashem if you're not having a proper relation with others, if you're being immoral to others. And that's why Rashi adds that this caution, the way you have to treat your friend with respect, because he's similar to your creator, he's in the form of your creator, is not just because he's your friend, it's not just because your friend and Hashem look similar. No, sorry. The reason why you have to be careful, the reason why the laws of treating somebody else is connected to the laws of the way you treat between you and Hashem is not just because Hashem said so, but we also understand that it's because in reality, your friend is created, Hashem created him in his image. So there is a direct connection between Anochi Hashem Elokecha and V'chol Asher L'Re'echa. Your Re'echa, your friend who you're told to treat in a respectful way, is really a mirror of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm Hashem your God, because Hashem creates him in his image. So if you mistreat him, you're mistreating Hashem, really. And Rashi puts it in there, in this grand finale, in the end of the portion of the Aseret Adibris. And we know it works always, Merubah Midat Tovah. The way of good is always much more powerful than the way of negativity. In other words, if we say that if you denigrate somebody else, you're denigrating Hashem, let's think of the reverse. Let's flip it. If you have Ahavat Yisrael, if you love your fellow Jew, not just love, but have a Ahavah Bilti Mugbelet, an unlimited love, which brings you to treat him in a way of respect, in the highest level of respect, you know what that is? That is respecting Hashem. That is loving Hashem, respecting Hashem, because Hashem and your friend, they're both in the same image. So respecting him is respecting the Anochi Hashem Elokecha as well. And it's like Shlomo HaMelech says, like the face of the water reflects the water. When you show your love to somebody else, that reveals the love of Hashem to us, which ultimately will bring to the Haramat Kvod Yisrael, the uplifting of the glory of Israel, even in the eyes of all the nations of the world. And it would lead us to the Kavod Amiti, the true glory, which will be when Mashiach comes. There's one thing I'd like to point out here, and that is, what makes Rashi go off and teach us something that you would expect to see in the book of Musar, in the book of ethics? He took a simple verse. Rashi always tells us what the Torah means. Doesn't tell us the moral of the pasuk. He tells us what is Rashi is a commentary. Why does he tell us there why does he bring from the Medrash that if you have to treat the stone so well, how much more so you have to treat your friend well? That's not Rashi, usual Rashi style. Rashi speaks, he should explain, don't climb up on a step on the Mizbeach. It's disrespectful, that's it. Pulling that message, that lesson, that sounds like a speech you would give in Shul on Shabbos, so that teaches us. Rashi says, the Torah says, don't climb up on the Mizbeach, it's disrespectful. That's what the Torah says. Now we would get up and say a speech, and the commentaries say, and the books of Musar say, and in Chassidut it says, if you can't even treat a stone like that, to show you can't treat your friend like that, why does Rashi put it into his basic commentary on the Torah? There must be something that pulls at him, that tells him that Hashem that it's there in the verse. It's begging to be said from the very pasuk. So there's a footnote that Rabbi says here, a very fascinating footnote 17 in the original. He says the reason Rashi brings this is because the Torah itself gives a reason. Why does the Torah give a reason? The Torah says, don't go up on steps. Many things the Torah gives us, don't put a milk and meat. It doesn't tell us why not. Many things the Torah doesn't tell us why not. You just tell us, don't go on steps to the Mizbeach. We wouldn't go on steps to the Mizbeach. The Torah gives a reason. So that you should not reveal your nakedness on it. Oh, says Rashi, 1 second. Why is there that instruction? And 1 second, if that's the instruction, because it's disrespectful, why only on the Mizbeach? So the fact that the Pasuk put in the reason and only said it on the Mizbeach, this tells us that in Pshuto Shel Mikra, in the simple reading of the Pasuk, there's something here that's being told to us. What is being told to us? This concept that the Mizbeach, its stones are unique because they're needed for the service, and therefore don't treat them disrespectfully. Why is the Torah telling us this with the reason? To tell us the way we have to act to others that are sensitive, if even the stones that are insensitive, but because there's a need for them, we can't denigrate them. Our friends who are, yes, sensitive, and they're directly, you see Hashem created them directly in his image, how much more so we have to make sure not to treat them in a denigrating way. This gives us a very, very powerful expression of how we need to treat others in a respectful and loving way.